Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Kiddushin Daf Kaftet. Very exciting because we're getting to a whole really interesting section of Dapim. They're a little bit of the type of, sometimes a little bit dizzying, I would say, more in terms of the world of drashot and learning all sorts of things from, this word says this, oh, that means this one's in, this one's out. We're going to see all that, which are not exactly dizzying always, but sometimes not the most convincing. And it's often the case where we're going to learn a lot of halachot that are derived from psukim, but probably likely were connected to psukim, but were kind of known already. There was a tradition that this was the case about who's exempt from mitzvot, who's not exempt from mitzvot. What we're really going to be starting is a whole section from here to the end of the first chapter is all about mitzvot and different things relating to mitzvot. So the first section is very interesting, specifically for women, for men as well, about what mitzvot women are obligated in and what mitzvot women are not obligated in. Okay, which mitzvot are connected, where women, again, now we're going to talk about what women are obligated. It doesn't say anything here about are women, can they connect to these mitzvot if they want to? Okay, it doesn't really address that. It really addresses obligation per obligation. Okay, we're going to get to mitzvot aseh shazman grama, time-bound commandments. That's going to actually come up on the daf for Rosh Hashanah, which will go up on Friday already. I'll put up all the dapim for both days of Rosh Hashanah, recommended to listen to because there's a lot more behind it that I'll discuss in those classes about mitzvot, time-bound mitzvot and women's exemption, and what about women opting in, which doesn't really come up in our sugya, does come up in other sugya, but we'll make some reference to it. These are really fascinating. If you're looking for some background on kind of the halachics of time-bound commandments and women being exempt or not. So there's an article from Diracheha that went up on our site yesterday. You can look at that. And with that, we will get started. So we're finishing up our long section on kinyanim and how we acquire things, right? Starting with the women, then we move to slaves, then we move to animals, then we move to items, houses, land, movables, etc. And we're going to finish that up right now and move on, as we said, to the next section, which is a whole question why this is here. I know Professor Ayala Lipson discussed it in her introduction to the Masechet. If you haven't heard it, you can listen. And some people connect it because we're going to see that one of the things in our Mishna is going to be what are the requirements of a father has to do for the son, and one of them is to marry him off. So perhaps that's what's going on here. That's the connection. Unclear exactly. So we have this Mishna. Without further introduction, we'll get into our daf. We have this Mishna about the difference between hekdesh items, sanctified items, and regular items and how they're acquired. And the main difference is that hekdesh items are acquired with money, whereas regular items are acquired by pulling. And money doesn't really affect a kinyan. And likewise, pulling doesn't affect a kinyan when it comes to hekdesh. So we said, right, we ended with this word, behedyo lo kana ad shimshoch v'yachzik. By the way, I said yachzik here sounded more like pulling and not chazaka. If you look at Rashi, he actually says the yachzik is in a house and yimshoch is in a shore. And that maybe it really does mean chazaka here, even though chazaka in the Mishnah really seemed to me more meshicha. But could be the chazaka here is relating to houses or fields. So now we're going to have 4 cases, which kind of break down into 2 sets, where we're going to talk about something that happened in hekdesh. Okay, so for example, I go to the temple, and the temple has all sorts of items that people donated. And they don't really need the item. It really just needs to be redeemed, and then the temple will get money, go into the temple treasury, and I'll get the item. That's called to redeem something from hekdesh. So I go to do this. Now, the question is, at what point, right, is it koneh? We already said it's koneh when I give the money for it, not if I pull the item, right? So therefore, what we're going to talk about now is what if there's some price change between this time and that time. So we're going to start with our first 2 cases. They're going to be where I did meshicha, I pulled the item, but I didn't pay the money for it yet. So so what do we know already? There's no kinyan yet, right? As long as there's no kinyan, well, if the price changes, then I'll have to pay probably this price at the moment I'm actually paying the money. So let's see. Mishacho b'maneh, when I pull the item toward me without having paid yet, without having redeemed it, it was worth 100. But I didn't yet redeem it. And by the time I redeemed it, a month later, let's say when I go to pay the money, I didn't have the money yet. I go to pay the money. Well, it's now worth 200. It went up in value. Notem matayim, I have to pay the value now because my time of v'natana kesef v'kamlo. Pasuk doesn't really say this. We've seen this pasuk quoted a lot. It's not really a pasuk. Okay, the pasuk is in Vayikra Kaf Zayin Yutet. Remember, im ga'ol yilgal, we talked about redeeming a field, and it had the double language, and we darshan that. Anyway, now we're focusing on the end of that pasuk. It says, if I redeem someone else's field, or I redeem my own field, right, this is if I redeem my own field, I sanctify my field, and then I redeem it, the asaf chamishit kesef or kachalav, I have to add an extra fifth, v'kamlo, and then the field will revert back to being mine. So what do you see here? It doesn't say natana kesef, but it basically describes I give the money and then it becomes mine. So the word natan ha-kesef doesn't appear in the pasuk. Kesef appears in the pasuk and v'kamlo appears in the pasuk, but not these words the way they're quoted here. But in any case, the point is the pasuk says I give the money and then it's mine. So here you see it's all about the money. So if I haven't paid the money, the price goes up. I pay the higher price. However, if when I pulled the item, it was worth 200. But when I went to pay the money, it was actually decreased in value, right? It was worth half the value. Notain matayim. Now, what would you say? You would say, look, kinyan is bekesef. I didn't pay the money yet. When I go to pay the money, all I have to pay is what it's worth now, which is 100. However, the halacha is I have to give 200. Why is that? Based on a different principle. My timer. Before we read it inside, what would happen if this was between you and me? I grabbed the item, right, or pulled the item. You sold it to me. I pulled it. I said, I'll pay you later. And then the price went down in value. So what happens, right? In this case, since I did meshicha and meshicha's kone at 200, there's no way that I'm going to get away with paying any less. When I go to pay the money, even though the price has gone down, it's too late because I got locked in when I pulled the item because that was the kinyan. So I obviously have to pay 200. Now, in the hekdesh case, I theoretically should only pay 100. So why do I have to pay 200? Lo yehei kach hedyot chamor mehekdesh. We're not going to have the law be more stringent by individuals than it is by the temple. We're never going to have the temple lose out. Right? This is what we call yado ala el yonah. The temple is always going to have the advantage. So we're not going to make the temple worse than, get less power than an individual would. And therefore, in this case, you're going to have to pay 200 also. So either way, you're going to have to pay 200. However, we're now going to see two other cases where the kinyan kesef happened and then the price changed, again, in both directions. So pida'o b'matayim, I redeemed it at 200, I paid the money, but I didn't yet take the item. I said, I'll come back in a month and I'll take the item. When I go to get the item, it's actually only worth 100. Obviously, no tematayim, because my time, I have to pay 200. I already paid the 200, and you get to keep that 200 as the temple treasury because v'natana kesef v'kamlo, because the kinyan is done with money in the hekdesh case. So that's clear. But pida'o b'maneh, if I paid 100 in the beginning, which means the kinyan was done at 100, and then lo ispik lemoshcho, but I didn't do meshicha. When I went to do meshicha, I went to pull the item, ad she'amad b'matayim. It's now worth 200. Now, does the temple treasury have a right to say, we're not giving you this item until you pass 200? No, because masha padoy ve'eno tein ela maneh. Because what's done is done. I paid the money, and I actually, in this case, I finally went out as the redeemer, because here the temple doesn't win out because I already paid 100, and that affected the kinyan. The Gemara is going to ask, and what would happen if it was between me and you? If I paid you 100 for something and I didn't get the item yet. So what happens? What happens is now the price is 200. What happens now? Do you have to give it to me? No. You can say, hey, listen, there's been no kinyan. As long as there's no kinyan, you can change your mind and say, listen, I'm only going to give it to you if you pay me 200. It's worth a lot more now. So again, it's all about when the kinyan happens. And in a hedyo world, the kinyan doesn't happen. So if that's the case, right, until the meshicha, so the fact that I paid is irrelevant. So therefore, the Gemara is going to ask the question, why didn't you say as you did before? If you could renege in this case, then why can't the temple treasury renege in this case? This would again be a case where the hedyot is going to end up being less strict than the hekdesh, because you're allowed to, right, the seller is allowed to renege. To which the Gemara asks, what do you mean the seller can renege? Maybe they can renege by Torah law, but they can't really renege. Atu hedyot la b'misha parakai. If we have this deal, okay? So we had a deal. I said I was going to buy something. Price changed. Are we allowed to change our minds? So can you say now, well, look, the price went up. I'm not willing to give you the item. You could theoretically say it, but you're going to get cursed. Okay. And this is interesting in the world of, right, it's hard for us to, how do we view curses? It's a good question. There's some people in our society that take curses very seriously. Some people that say, right, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me. And, it's just a curse. But in those days, they obviously took them very seriously. And basically the curse is Misha Paraman, She Dora Mabul, Midor Flaga, okay, the God who exacted punishment on the generation of the flood and the generation of those who build the Tower of Babel. That God will basically take out on you for reneging on this deal. So if anyone reneges on a deal after the money was passed, even though they really can, but they really can't because they're going to get cursed for it. So that's why in the end, it's not like they really can, you really can renege. Okay. And therefore, we're going to say, right, once the money was given, you really can't renege. And if you do, you're going to get this curse. And therefore, the hekdesh isn't any less strong than a regular person because neither can really change their mind in this case. Now we're getting to this famous Mishnah. My mitzvot, kol mitzvot haben ala'av, anashim chayavim v'nashim p'turot. Okay, maybe also because we're in Kiddushin, and Kiddushin is all about the woman. Maybe because of that, we're getting to this Mishnah all about women and their responsibilities. I'm even thinking now another reason, right? Perhaps some people think, we'll get to this, we'll talk about this on the daf for Rosh Hashanah, which is about why women are exempt from time-bound mitzvot. It's a fascinating question. And some people say it's because they're responsible for, right, toward their husband or toward their children. And again, that all connects with marriage. It's another possible reason why this is here. Anyway, let's read. So things that are, now we're going to have to, it's hard to translate this and the Gemara is going to struggle with it. So it's hard. I'm going to try to just say it literally. Mitzvot of the son on the father, okay, which we don't really know what this means yet. Anashim chayavim v'nashim p'turot. So in this category, men are responsible and women are exempt. When men are obligated, women are exempt. Kol mitzvot ha'av alaben, but the reverse, which we don't yet know what these mean yet. Okay, one is father to son and one is son to father. Echad anashim ve'echad nashim chayavim. So one category, men and women are equal about their obligation. In the other category, women are exempt. We'll get to that very shortly and explain, and then it'll be clear. But right now, it's really not so clear. If there's a mitzvah, a positive commandment, that is time-bound. We're going to split between positive and negative. Positive commandment is going to have two categories, time-bound mitzvah and not related to any time. Any mitzvah shazman grama, okay, the whole language of grama, the time caused it. It's a little bit of a strange language. If you have time in Mishna, Eretz Yisrael, if your Hebrew is good, you can read. You can find it on Safai, on the Mishna. If you go into the Mishna and look at commentaries, you can find it. He talks about this language in the Mishna and all sorts of other interesting things. But in any case, mitzvah shazman grama, time-bound commandments, anashim chayavim v'nashim p'turot. Okay, we'll talk about later what time-bound commandments are, right? Either they're only some time of the year you can do it, like holiday of Sukkot, for example, or, right, like the mitzvah of shofar, or their mitzvot, we'll get to shofar later, okay, dafka mat'im, that it's going to come up on Rosh Hashanah, although on the day that we don't blow the shofar this year. So any case, we're going to have anything that's time-bound, positive commandment that either is certain times of year or only during the day and not at night. That already makes it time-bound, which is very interesting. You'd think if you have all day to do it, maybe it's not time-bound. So men are obligated, women are exempt. Okay, why this is, again, this whole discussion, I'm going to push off till we get to the daf lamed daled, where it really comes up. Because today's topic is going to be really the first line of the Mishnah. If it's not time-bound at all, positive commandment, they're all obligated. Negative commandments, whether they're bound to time, a certain time or they're not, men and women are both equally obligated. There's three exceptions to this rule. Bal takif, bal tashchit, bal titamei l'metim, and this all we'll get to also later, which is right on daf lamed hey. Other than bal takif, which is don't remove your peot and end up with this circular kind of haircut where your haircut looks like a circle around your head without anything else. or bal tashchit, which are the 5 corners of a man's beard that he's not allowed to shave off. Okay, shave with a razor. We'll get to that, how we know it's with a razor. That's why electric shavers can be used, or there are people who don't shave at all. Ubal titamei l'metim, and not to become impure to dead people, which is an obligation, only a negative commandment on Kohanim only, and only on male Kohanim. Okay, so we have 3 exceptions to the rule. In the Gemara, they'll add more, but right now we have 3 exceptions to the rule. These are just not relevant to women. Okay, but all other negative commandments are relative to women. If you want to know more about mitzvot aseh shazman gra on a practical level, Diracheh is an excellent website that's all about women, talks about all sorts of women's obligation in certain things, a lot of articles about all sorts of topics that relate in Judaism to women, plus other just interesting halachic topics. So there's an article this week that went up yesterday on our site from Diracheh, which also links to their site, so you can read more in depth about it, but about a lot of basics about women being exempt from time-bound mitzvot from a halachic perspective. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Mishna, to discussion of the Mishna, and our whole daf is really going to be taking apart a braita, or not really taking apart, but delving in depth into a braita that the Gemara is going to quote, which relates to our Mishna. So first they want to understand, though, what does this mean, haben al ha'av? My kol mitzvot haben al ha'av. It sounds like mitzvot that a son is supposed to do for the father. Okay? Ilema, if you're going to say, I see you're asking, just I'll stop for a minute, where the Diracheh site, so you can Google Diracheh, okay, D-E-R, Diracheh, okay? But if you don't want to do that, it's easier. You can go to our site. On the homepage, you can find this article in the Beyond the Daf section, or at the bottom of today's Daf post, it'll be also all extra materials on each Daf appears at the bottom of the Daf post. There you can get to the article, and from there you can link directly to their site. So that's the easiest way to find it also. Okay. So my kol mitzvot haben al ha'av. What does this mean? Mitzvot haben al ha'av. It sounds like the son is obligated to do to the father, and that's only son and not daughter. Well, that can't really be. If it's the son is supposed to do for the father, nashim p'turot, women are exempt, can't possibly be. V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a braita, ish, okay, now we're talking about what's one of the main mitzvot children have to do for their parents. Well, usually say kibud avaim, but in addition to kavod, giving them respect, there's yirah, you should fear your parents. And the pasuk about fearing your parents says, ish imo va'aviv tirau, a man, his mother and father, interesting, mother comes first, there's all sorts of drashot on that, we'll get to that later. Mother and his father, they should fear. Now, who's they should fear? If it said ish, ish is singular, and it ends in a verb, the plural, they should fear. The subject is they when it started with he. So, ish and liala ish. Just looking at the word ish, it sounds like just a man is obligated to fear his parents. Isha minayin, how do we know that women are obligated to fear their parents? When we say, right, a man should, a man, his father and mother, they should fear, they includes 2, which includes women. Okay, so there you have women are included, and therefore it can't be that ben al ha'av is things the son is supposed to do for the father, because it says women are exempt and women are actually obligated. By the way, I just want to point out what I kind of mentioned before, and maybe I said it too much before we even saw the daf, but we're going to learn all sorts of things from drashot, but really the goal is in learning here is to think about what's the reason behind this, right? It makes sense that women would be obligated in fearing their parents just like men would be, right? This is an obligation that transcends gender, basically. Okay, I mean, obviously it's going to be complicated. Maybe all things should transcend gender, and why this and not that. It's food for thought. There's no good answers to these questions, but it doesn't, how do you say, right? We might not get all the answers to these questions, but it doesn't mean that we aren't obligated to, talking about obligation, but basically we should try to figure out what are the reasons behind this, right? So this makes sense in a logical plane that women should fear their parents just as well. Amar Rav Yehuda, hachi kamar. So Rav Yehuda explains this is how to read the Mishna. Kol mitzvot, when it says haben al ha'av, it doesn't mean the son is obligated to do for the father. What it means is kol mitzvot haben. It's a mitzvah of the sons. Hamutalot al ha'av la'asot lebeno. Ben al ha'av means it's a mitzvah of the son that is al ha'av, that is on the father to do for the son. those things, anashim chayavim v'nashim p'turot. And that's the category we're going to discuss today. Okay, that's our whole topic today is going to be all different things that father is obligated to do for his son. We're going to learn father to son, not mother to son. Okay, and most of these cases also not mother to daughter, right? Not father to daughter either. So Tanina lahaditanu Rabbanan. Now examples of this are brought in a braita, and here we're going to read the braita, and then the Gemara is going to go in depth into this braita, going case by case, and we're going to get to how do we know that, right, that the father has to do it for the son? How do we know that the mother doesn't need to do it? Okay, all these things. So here we start. First one is the father is obligated to circumcise the son, lifdoto, to do a pidyon ben, if he's the firstborn, lelamdo Torah, to teach him Torah. Get today about women being exempt from learning Torah. Lahasio isha, to marry him off to a woman, okay, to make sure he gets married off. Lelamdo umanut, to teach him a trade. It's interesting. You wouldn't necessarily thought it's halacha, but it's halacha, to teach your son a trade, because he has to be able to make a livelihood. Yeshomrim, some people even say, you have to teach him to swim. Okay, these are basic needs that, very fascinating that this comes up here, right? Because that's basically teaching him to be able to save his life. If he falls into the water and he can't swim, he could drown. So you have to teach him basic life tools. So, right, the last two are really life tools. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, okay, so in this braita, it says, Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol she'eino melamed beno umanut. As I'm reading this, I want you to think about what this sounds like to you. What other line we saw, there was a very similar language, almost complete similar language. Kol she'eino melamed beno umanut melamdo listut. Rabbi Yehuda says, anyone who doesn't teach his son a trade is teaching him to steal. To which the Gemara says, listut salkadatach. What? If I didn't teach my son a trade, it's not like I taught him how to steal. I mean, there's a whole art to stealing. I didn't teach him that, how you're going to steal and get away with it. It means it's as if you're teaching him to steal, because if he can't afford to live, what is he going to do but steal, right? If he has no money, that'll cause him to steal. So what statement do we know that's like this, right? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kol ha'melamed bito Torah, melamda tiflut. Remember, if you teach your daughter Torah, you teach her tiflut, to which the Gemara, this was in Sota, and what did the Gemara ask? The exact same question. Tiflut sakadatach, you remember? It's tiflut, and then they say, ki'ilu milamdat tiflut, right? They added that word ki'ilu just like they did here. It's not like he really teaches her tiflut, it's like he's teaching her tiflut. So I just thought it was interesting. It was the exact same structure of the statement itself. Anyone who does this is doing this. And then they said, really, you're doing that? It's as if you're doing it. Okay. Anyway, apropos for today, because we're going to talk, right? That is the negative statement. You shouldn't teach your daughter Torah. Today, we're just going to see that you don't have to teach your daughter Torah. It doesn't mean you can't. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer thought you can't. Ben Az, I remember, thought you should. So difference of opinion here. Obviously, Rabbi Eliezer just became the mainstream opinion for many, many years, but that is slowly changing, or maybe not so slowly anymore. Okay. Limulo. Okay, Brit Milah, we know why girls are not part of this. Girls can't be circumcised. But the question is why our mother's not obligated, right? And before we get there, we have to see why our father's obligated. What if the father doesn't do it? Who else is obligated? Limulo, minalam. Where do we get that the father is obligated to give a Brit Milah to his son? Well, where's the first time we hear about Brit Milah? Dichtiv vayamal Avraham et Yitzchak beno. Avraham did the Brit Milah for Yitzchak. Vehecha delo mahale avua. And what the father doesn't do it, then then the Beit Din has to come and take care of it. Because it says right there, it says you as a community, you have to do it. Okay, all the males. What if the court doesn't do it? You have to take care of it yourself. Obviously, not until you're older, but you have to take care of it yourself. Okay, and a person, an uncircumcised person who doesn't circumcise himself will get karet. So because you're going to get punished with karet, in the end, the punishment goes on you, not on the father. So while it's true the father's supposed to do it, it's also logical. You're too young when you're 8 days old. You can't do it yourself. So obligation is on the father, if not on the Beit Din. Good question. I see Batsheva, you wrote about Sipora circumcised her son. First of all, you see there that you can do it, right? Just because you're not obligated doesn't mean you can't, but she wasn't obligated. She did take care of it. But here we're talking on an obligation level. So now they say, so basically it works. Father, Beit Din, the court, and then the son himself. How do we know? Because that's what the Mishna said, that women are exempt. Now, here's why I say this all comes from drasha, but you have to understand there must be something more behind it. Usually the drasha in these kind of cases is there's a tradition, and then they connect it to the pasuk, because many times oto really means, right, men and female, right? The way the Hebrew language works is it uses the masculine when it's referring to males and females. So this is the world of drasha, where often they know the tradition is that women are not obligated, and then they just connect it to a pasuk. So oto ula ota, him and not her. Now they say, wait, him and not her appears by Abraham, right? God commanded Abraham. Now, maybe that's only for Abraham, but maybe in future generations, women are obligated. Tana de Rabbi Ishmael. So the braita of Rabbi Ishmael, they taught when the word sav, a commandment, comes up, like siva in this case, which is God commanded him. Number one, it's saying, hurry up and do this. It's like strengthening you to do this, pushing you. And it's for that moment and also for future generations. How do we know this? Said, command Yoshua to be the new leader and give him strength, right? That's zeruz. That's basically encouraging him, pushing him to do it. This is a pasuk in, I think it's in Devarim. 1 second. Right, just lost my place. Min hayom. Oh, sorry, it's in Bamidbar, chapter 15. Okay, all the things that Moshe commanded you in the name of God, or God commanded you, sorry, in the name of Moshe. From this day that God commanded you, and here's the word command, and in future generations. So here's Tziva, connects with immediately and going to the future. So therefore, they learn that whatever it said there, Asher Tziva to Elohim, is for future generations as well. That's Brit Milah. Next one, liftoto, to redeem your firstborn son. Minalan dechtiv. Okay, I'll read you the pasuk. Okay, from the middle of the pasuk, I'll read you. Kol bechor banecha tifdeh. You should redeem all your firstborn sons. Notice it says sons, by the way, not daughters. Below, again, which could be sons and daughters, but in this case, they're going to say sons and not daughters. Below your upanai rekam. You shouldn't come empty-handed to see my face. What does empty-handed have to do with doing pidyon haben? You don't do a pidyon haben in the temple. Very strange. Later, we're going to come back to this. I just wanted you to see it already right now. So now they say, how do you know that you have to redeem? Because it says you have to redeem your son. Because it says, Kol b'chor banecha tifteh. Who's the commandment to? The father. V'hecha dilo parke avua, again, what if the father doesn't do it? Mechayev ihu lemifreke. He has to do it himself. Okay, if you weren't born to a family where they took care of the pidyon haben, and you grow up and you realize and you find out, no one ever did a pidyon haben for me, then you actually have to do it yourself. Dichtiv pado tifteh. Okay, here it says in another pasuk, pado tifteh. So pado tifteh is double language. That means someone else is commanded to do it, but you're also commanded if they don't do it for you. How do we know that she's not commanded, the mother, to redeem her firstborn son? Dichtiv tipade tifteh. Okay, this is taking the word, and you can read the vowels. We're going to do this a few times today in two ways. The word tifteh could be read as tifteh, you should redeem, and tipade, you should be redeemed. So we're going to do the same thing with limadetem and limadetem, which could be teach or learn. So same thing here, redeem or be redeemed. So what do we learn from here? And we're going to do the exact same thing by teaching Torah or learning Torah. If you're commanded to redeem yourself, which right now only boys are commanded to redeem themselves, we'll have to see in a minute how we know girls aren't commanded to redeem themselves. It's going to be a little bit kind of long-winded here, but let's go with it. If you're commanded to redeem yourself, then mitzuveh liftot et acherim. Because of the tifdeh, tipadeh, you're supposed to redeem and you're supposed to be redeemed. So if you're commanded to redeem, sorry, I didn't say that right. Tifdeh, you're supposed to redeem. That's the verb of redeeming someone else. And tipadeh is to be redeemed yourself. So only when you're commanded to be redeemed yourself, are you commanded also to redeem others? So the mother is not commanded to redeem herself, and therefore is not commanded to redeem others, her son. That's what we're going to read right now. So again, if you're commanded to redeem yourself, then you're commanded to redeem others. That's the man. If you're not commanded to redeem yourself, then you're not commanded to redeem others. Obviously, there's a bit of a weakness here, because most men aren't commanded to redeem themselves because they're not firstborns. It doesn't mean only firstborn fathers are commanded to redeem their sons. They just mean men in general are commanded to redeem themselves if they happen to be a firstborn. Now they say, how do we know that she is not commanded to redeem herself? The last drasha was based on this, we're going to do all the time here, which is each drasha makes an assumption. The question is going to be, how do you know that? Right? So how do you know that she's not commanded to redeem herself? Now notice the pasuk says, a man should redeem his firstborn son. Now it doesn't say the son should redeem himself, but we learned the son should redeem himself. Maybe a daughter should redeem herself if she's a firstborn. Never, right? Maybe. How do you know that she's not, right? The last drasha was said she's not commanded to redeem herself. She's not commanded to redeem others, which we took as a given. But why is it a given? Maybe the father's not commanded, just like we talked about, by the way, with Talmud Torah. Some people say the father's not commanded to teach the daughter, but it doesn't mean the daughter, or if you take the negative, the father shouldn't teach the daughter. Some people say it doesn't mean the daughter can't learn by herself. That's one of the reasons people say, oh, women can learn. Maybe just their father shouldn't teach them, but women can learn themselves, right? Obviously, we'd like to believe a father can also teach their daughter, right? And not take Rabbi Eliezer seriously enough in our generation, right? Things have changed, in his day, maybe, but in our day, not. But that's one way that some of the commentaries get around his statement. They say, well, if she wants to learn herself, go do it. Anyway, here, but again, go do it. I want to be very clear here. Here we're talking obligation. A woman is not obligated to redeem herself. Now, I've never heard of a woman who tried to redeem herself, but here they're talking on the level of obligation. How do we know she's not obligated? Again, tifte, tipade. Okay, we're going to do another drasha here. Tifte means redeem yourself. Tipade is be redeemed. So now they're going to go one step farther with this drasha. If others are commanded to redeem you, then tifte, then you're mitzuveh liftot et atzmo, then tipade, then you should redeem yourself. But no one's commanded to redeem a woman, and therefore she's not commanded to redeem herself. If others aren't commanded to redeem you, then then you don't have to redeem yourself. Now, we still haven't really said that, though. How do you know that others aren't, even though I kind of told you this, how do you know that others aren't commanded to redeem her? Because it says your firstborn sons and not daughters. So you really have to take this whole thing backwards now. Women, right? Fathers are commanded to redeem their sons and not their daughters. Since daughters are not commanded to be redeemed, they're not commanded to redeem themselves. Since they're not commanded to redeem themselves, they're not commanded to redeem their sons. And that's how we get to women are not commanded. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're talking about Pidyon Ben. Now we're leaving the realm of who's obligated, who's not obligated, but we're talking about other obligations, times where maybe you wouldn't be obligated, we're going to see. And we're going to have like values discussions. Who liftot, ubeno liftot. Well, let's say you don't have enough money to cover your Pidyon Ben and your son's Pidyon Ben, and nobody redeemed you, and now you have to do both. Which one are you going to do? It's kind of like on the airplane, right? You have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put on somebody else. So here we go. Hu kodem libeno. That's Tanakama. Take care of yourself first, and then take care of others. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, beno kodmo. The son comes first. Shezeh mitzvato alaviv, v'zeh mitzvat beno alav. Your mitzvah Pidyon Ben, if you're a man, is on your father. And your son's mitzvah is on you. So do the one that's on you, which is to do your son. So he says the opposite. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Hakol Modim, and Rabbi Yirmiyah says, they actually all agree, turning now to Amar Bet, Kol Hecha Deleka Ela Chamesh Slaim, Hu Kodem Libeno. Actually, if it's really the way I described it, I only have 5 slaim to my name, and that's what it costs to do Pidyon Ben. Everyone agrees that you have to deal with yourself first. Okay, back to the airplane image. Okay, it's always easy to remember that airplane idea. Put on your own oxygen mask first. Take care of yourself, then take care of somebody else. My time, mitzvah de gufe adifa. It's always more important to do a mitzvah on your own body than on someone else. Kipligi. What's the machloket? Let's say in my wallet I have 5 slaim, but I sold you land after the obligation kicked in already, after I had a son, let's say, or after even my own obligation. And the question now becomes, can I demand the money? Can actually not me, but the Kohen, when I go to redeem my son, can the Kohen say, look, you owe me 5 sla'im. I can go take it from your nechasim mishuabadim, your lien property. We've talked about this many times. Do you have lien property? Is a Torah obligation? Does it create a lien? Usually it's a document between us that says, I owe you money. That creates a lien on my property. But the question is, in this case, can Mr. Cohen go to, Mr. To Mr. Smith that I sold him my land, and can he take the property from him? So Rabbi Yehuda Saval, milve dichtiv b'Torah kechtuva b'shtar damya. Rabbi Yehuda holds, and what did Rabbi Yehuda say? Don't take care of yourself first, take care of your son first. What does that mean, take care of your son first? Use your 5 sla'im in your wallet for your son. Now, he still thinks you have to take care of yourself. It's not that you don't have to take care of yourself. It's just that he holds that an obligation, a milveh is a loan. But what it really means is something you owe by Torah law, which is to redeem yourself. It's like it's written in a document, which means, so the 5 you have in your wallet, pay for your son. Va'azil Kohen, and then the Kohen can come. Mr. Cohen can come and go to Mr. Smith that you sold the property to and take the money that he's owed by you. The Rabbanan right now, why do the rabbis say you got to take care of yourself and not your son? Because the rabbis hold Torah obligations can't be demanded from lien property. There is no such thing, according to him. And therefore, you're only going to be able to do one. If you can only do one, mitzvah digufe'ah. What we're really saying about Rabbi Yehuda is, in this case, you can actually do 2. If you really can only do one, then you have to take care of yourself. But if you could do 2, then first you do your sons with your free money, and then yourself, since it's a Torah obligation, the lien property can be used for it. Tanu Rabbanan. Another question. What if lifdotit beno v'lalot laregel? You have a choice. You can either do the pidyon ben, or you can go on aliyah laregel. Again, probably it means you don't have enough money to afford both. So you want to go for the holiday to the temple and bring sacrifices? Well, podet beno v'achar koch aleh laregel. According to Tanakama, first you have to redeem your son, then you can go on aliyah laregel. Rabbi Yehuda omer oleh laregel v'achar koch podet beno. First you do aliyah laregel, then you redeem your son. Why is that? Well, interestingly, Tanakama doesn't give a reason. Rabbi Yehuda gives his reason in the braita. It's very logical. Even though you're supposed to do pidyon ben after 30 days, on that day, but you can always push it off. I mean, you have your whole life to do it. But if I don't go on Sukkot to the temple, well, I'm going to miss my chance. I can't go to the temple and bring the sacrifice, the olat riyah, the burnt offering that we bring on the holiday after the holiday is over. I could go and bring other sacrifices, but I missed that opportunity for that mitzvah. So therefore, obviously, you go on aliyah regel first. So, and you'll deal at some point later, hopefully you'll get money and you'll be able to redeem your son. So now they say, Bishlam ala Rabbi Yehuda kid kamartama. We get, Rabbi Yehuda explains exactly his reason. Ela Rabbanan, my time, what's the reason? Now we go back to that pasuk I quoted in the beginning. Da'amar kra kol b'chor banecha tifteh. V'hadar lo yira'u panai rekam. Look at the order in the pasuk, and this explains possibly why it says lo yira'u panai rekam in that sentence, which has nothing to do with anything, or presumably, okay, the commentaries all give reasons why that's in the pasuk. I'll leave that for Tanakh Shiur, but the way the Gemara deals with this is to say, it says redeem your first son and don't come empty-handed to my temple, meaning, right, make sure to come to my temple and come with sacrifice. So what do you see? What comes first? Redeem your son. Therefore, redeeming your son, if there's a values issue and you can't do one or the other, do the son first. Again, you can think about it. Again, this is a drasha, but what's the idea behind it? Perhaps you come up with an idea, which is, aliyah regel is a communal thing. And, if you miss out on a communal thing, maybe it's not the end of the world, but your own son, right? It's almost like the oxygen mask. You have to take care of things in your family, and then you can join communal things as well. I'm just kind of throwing out an idea. It doesn't necessarily mean this is true across the board, but it's possibly a way to think about it. Like I said, all of these really beg the question, why really is this, is this going to come before that? Or as we said, is this person obligated, not that, you're obligated in this mitzvah, not that mitzvah. If you were married to 5, man was married to 5 different women, each one had a firstborn son, how do you know you're obligated? Talmud Lomar, Kol B'chor Banecha Tifdeh, because it says the eldest son of, now it doesn't really say it here. We're going to see in a minute why this is, but they're going to say, wait, this is obvious. Pshita, why are you even telling this? The Torah talks about the first to come out of the womb, which makes it obvious it's dependent on the mother, not the father. So why are you even telling us this? Isn't it very obvious? Well, no, it's not so obvious because Ma'od Detema, and we've seen this many times in this case and in other things as well, that all go by the father, right? Nelaf bechor bechor min achala. The firstborn son who gets double, right? If you think about a firstborn son, so his firstborn son who gets double, his firstborn son who gets redeemed. Wouldn't you think they're the same? And the firstborn son who gets double, if a man has 5 wives, and right, obviously there's a bit of an extreme case, very unlikely a man is going to have 5 wives, but and there's all different kinds. Either he could have 5 wives at the same time, it could be they died, it could be he divorced them, whatever it is. It's an extreme case. I don't think it's so realistic, but they're just kind of throwing it out there. They like to give examples of 5. So if there's 5 wives, 5 sons, they all get redeemed, and you don't learn it from Bechor L'Nachala. When it comes to Bechor for your double, that they get a double portion of your inheritance, Malalam Reshit Ono, Afkam Reshit Ono. There you might have thought it's Reshit Ono, it goes by the father. So if the father has these 5 sons from 5 different wives, it's only the one who was firstborn to the father. Therefore, don't think that it's the same thing for Pidyon Ben. Pidyon Ben really has to do with the first to come out of the womb. Okay, it's similar, by the way, to animals. Also the firstborn that comes out of the womb, Kamash Malan. Why this is and why the Torah set it up that way, that's another good question. I don't have an answer. It doesn't mean there aren't answers, but I don't have one right now. Lilamdo Torah. Okay, we get to our fascinating topic of learning Torah. Okay, so Minal, and how do we know a father's commanded to teach his son Torah? You should teach your sons. We obviously know where this is going in terms of women. B'nechem, your sons and not your daughters, but we'll get there soon. We're going to do the same thing with Pidyon Ben. If the father doesn't teach him, he has to teach himself, learn himself. Dichtiv, ulemaditem. Okay, this is a pasuk elsewhere, although some people think it's just a different way to put the vowels on vilimaditem. You could do ulemaditem, and then it would be, and you have to learn. Okay, but most people don't think that that's what's going on here. In a minute, we're going to do that with something else. But right now, like the tifde tipadeh. But right now, there's another pasuk in Shemot which says, "Ulamadetem otam ushmartem lasotam." It's about Moshe saying, it's chapter 5 of Dvarim, the first pasuk. Moshe gives them, he says to them, listen to all the mitzvot that I'm telling you, learn them in order to do them. And by the way, this would be the biggest pitch for women to learn, right? If learning them is the way to actually learn how to do them, then you should learn them so that you can keep the mitzvot. So now they say, but how do we know women are not obligated? So that shows you have to learn them yourself, because there it doesn't say anyone's teaching you. There it says learn them yourself. How do you know she's not obligated, a woman? We're going to do the same thing we did by Pidyon Ben. Or similar. Okay, now we're talking, sorry, I didn't say it right. How do we know she's not obligated as a mother to teach her son Torah? That's the first question. So the answer is because if you're commanded to learn, then you're commanded to teach, right? Because you could take the word vilimadetem, which means to teach, and it also means, if you change the vowels, ulimadetem, and you should learn. So one who is commanded to learn is commanded to teach. So since women aren't commanded to learn, which we don't yet know why, again, we have to go backwards here, then they're not commanded to teach their sons. How do we know she's not commanded to learn herself? Again, this is just like Pidyon Ben. We're now going to take another drasha from the same thing. If others are commanded to teach you, then you're going to be commanded to learn yourself. But if no one's commanded to teach you, then in the event that they don't take care of it, you're not commanded to do it yourself. Now, last line of this section. How do we know that other people aren't commanded to teach her? So again, sons and not daughters are commanded to be taught by their father. If they're not commanded to be taught by their father, then they're not commanded to learn themselves. If they're not commanded to learn themselves, then they're not commanded to teach others. And that's how we get that the mothers are not obligated. Again, this is all the level of obligation. There's no word here about that you can't. The word comes that you can't is with that statement of Rabbi Eliezer that we made reference to. And then there's a whole lot more to be said about that, but not for today. Tano Rabbanan. He should be learning, and his son needs to learn, but he doesn't have enough money to do both. Again, take care of yourself first, according to Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it really depends, he says. If your son is sharp and can learn, this, by the way, shows that learning is not necessarily for everybody, then your son should go first. And here we're going to have a story. Kiyat Rav Yaakov bereid Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Okay, Rav Yaakov, the son of Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Shadrei Abu Alakamei Abaye. His father sends him to yeshiva to learn with Abaye. Kiyata, when he gets home from yeshiva, father starts asking him questions. He says, wow, you don't really get this at all. He says, listen, I'm going to go instead of you then. You stay home. I'm going to learn. Well, what happens in the story? Shama Abaye de Kahava Atin. He hears that Rav Acha bar Yaakov is coming. There happens to be an evil spirit that's been torturing everybody in the Beit Midrash. Even if people went in pairs, you might remember, pairs are a good way to avoid evil spirits. During the daytime is a good way to avoid evil spirits. Nothing worked. People still were getting damaged or attacked by this evil spirit. Some people say, by the way, the evil spirit was arrogance, and there was a lot of arrogance in the Beit Midrash. This is all symbolic of problems. Amar lehu. So Abaye says to all the people there, lo leitiv le'inish ushpiza. Don't let anybody give him a place to sleep. Why? I want him to sleep in the Beit Midrash. I want the shade to come out, and maybe a miracle will happen, and he'll be able to save us from the shade. It's like kind of Abaye's last-ditch effort to deal with this shade. He thought that this rabbi had the power. Al bat ba'hu be'Rabbanan. So he goes in and he sleeps in that Beit Midrash. Bat means he sleeps. Id melei ketanina deshiva reshvata. This thing appears with 7 heads. By the way, this could be arrogance, right? You're very full of yourself. They always talk about in your head. Kol kri'a dekare. And what does he do? And this is why the arrogance thing fits in. He bows down. To bow down is to show you're not so arrogant. Every bow he did praying for this shade to leave him alone, 1 head would come off. Natar chad resha. And he basically saves them from the shade. Amar luhula machal. He says to them tomorrow, what's his big, right? He's the big hero. They're celebrating him. And his only reaction is, ilo et rachish nisa sakintin. If a miracle hadn't happened, you would have endangered me. What on earth were you doing by making me sleep in that room? Okay, and this is a really good question. How really could they have done that? But I think the idea of the arrogance and the humility, that the humility was necessary. And then the commentary says that why did he say you put me in danger? Not from the shade, but by putting me into this Beit Midrash full of arrogant people. It's a bad environment to be in. And maybe, by the way, that shows why his son wasn't successful in this environment, which is another interesting point that I just thought of right now. Okay, let's quickly get to at least the end of this section. To learn Torah and to get married. What do we do first? Because remember, we said the father's supposed to marry off the son. So now you want to learn Torah, we're on the Torah topic, or to get married. What do you do first? Yomod Torah v'achar kach yisaisha. First learn, then get married, right? I was always brought up in this, go to college, right? Then get married. Don't get married before college. This definitely not everybody believes in that. Nowadays, I certainly see, especially in Israel, where people go to college much later, right? A lot of that is not necessarily the case. What's the idea? Because, in my day, it was after you finish college, you can make a living, and you can't support yourself. You have to support yourself, but also you're going to be distracted by the responsibilities of marriage, and it's going to be hard to learn Torah. However, there's balance, which is sometimes people are at the age where they're ready to get married, and the problem we're going to see in the Gemara is they're going to have all sorts of thoughts about women, and they want to be with women, and it's going to distract them from being able to learn. So then So then get married first. The halacha is, according to Shmuel, he says marry a woman first, then learn. Rabbi Yochanan what is going to have the burden of parnasa and having to make money and learn Torah? You can't do both at the same time, and therefore you should learn Torah first. V'lo pligi halan v'halahu. We don't have enough time to go into this, but it's fascinating machloket here. They really don't argue. One is talking about Israel, and one is talking about Babylonia, which makes sense because Shmuel was in Babylonia, Rabbi Yochanan was in Israel. Well, how does that match up, and why? It's a really good question. I'll give you really just very short, and then I guess we'll stop for today. But Rashi says that, and the best way to line it up is Shmuel's in Babylonia, and therefore it's speaking to the Babylonians. The Babylonians would go abroad to learn Torah, and therefore didn't have the obligation of feeding their families on their heads because they were abroad learning Torah. And the Israelis were living at home because the yeshivas were in Israel, and therefore they were able to support once they were married, they'd have to support their wives. So Rabbi Yochanan said, first learn Torah and then support your wives. Tosafos says, what are you, crazy? What? Just because they go leave their wives, they don't have to support their wives? That's crazy. No way, no how. And he basically flips it and said that Rabbi Yochanan was talking to those in Babylonia, and he was talking to those in Israel, and that it had to do with, it was actually saying, okay, when he said, he was saying, you have the obligation upon you. Don't leave your wives and go learn and ignore your obligation. And he goes into a different explanation. Some people say that it could be reflective of the history that really, and he says, by the way, don't think it's weird that he's poskening for the other place and he's poskening for the other place, because sometimes students came and discussed. And the last, it's hard for me not to mention these because I think they're so interesting. Another could be historical, that maybe in Babylonia, the women were working and they were, first of all, in a better financial situation in general in the time of the Amoraim. And it could be that what they were saying was, in Israel, times are rough and you have to work. So don't learn before you have to really get a job and support your family. Whereas in Babylonia, there was a lot of prosperity. People were wealthy, were able to do both, or just could be the wives were able to work and therefore they didn't need to worry about it. So very interesting debate. We'll stop here and we'll get to the next case tomorrow, which is another story, starting with another story. Okay, and all about getting married young. Is it good to get married young or not? Fascinating topic. So quick review. We started with finishing up this Reshut Gavoa and what happens when there's price fluctuation. Either there was meshicha without money or there was money without meshicha. Then we went to all these things in the Mishna. Where are women obligated? Are they not obligated? Which ones they are, which ones they're not. We're going to go one by one. And the only one we really dealt with today was things that fathers are supposed to do for their sons. We quoted a braita with a whole list of them, and we've basically been going one by one through all of them, showing how we know the father's obligated, who's obligated when the father doesn't do it, and how do we know that women are exempt from all these mitzvot. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a great day, fascinating topics, and we'll have a lot more interesting things over the next few days.